Hello there, my name is Ayala Connell and I'm a gluten-free and paleo chef, and this is an episode of Simply Paleo with me. And today we're going to be learning how to make vanilla cupcakes with very decadent chocolate frosting. And these cupcakes are fantastic for any sort of celebratory occasion, particularly with kids, because it's so simple for birthday parties and things of that nature to have those single serving desserts. So today we're going to learn how to make it, but other than just festivities, this could definitely be a just because baking expedition with your family or on your own if you're just needing some peaceful time in the kitchen. They're very simple to make. You just need to have all the different alternative flours that are paleo friendly. So let's get started. We're going to use a large bowl. A lot of times I'll use my KitchenAid mixer bowl, but today we're going to use that for the frosting and not have to stop and clean it in between to show you how I do this in my own kitchen. I'm going to do the batter for the cupcakes in here, and then I'm going to do the frosting in the KitchenAid mixer because I need it to whip it up very quickly. All right, so we're going to start with the various flours. So in this bowl I have 3/4 of a cup of cassava flour. Now cassava flour is made from a root vegetable, and it's a paleo friendly flour. It's an alternative flour because it doesn't have any grain in it. Even gluten-free grains like rice, this is free of. This is entirely made out of the cassava root. Now some of you might be familiar with tapioca. Tapioca or tapioca starch is actually the starch that is extracted from the cassava root. So it's actually within our wheelhouse. But cassava flour is the entire root vegetable flour, and it is a fantastic alternative flour that's less inflammatory because it doesn't digest with difficulty in our body. So we're going to do 3/4 of a cup of cassava flour, and then we also have a 1/2 cup of ground flax seeds. Now you can make ground flax seeds yourself, which is fantastic because you get such a freshness of essential fatty acid oils, but you can also easily buy it. There's a lot of different companies that make ground flax. Bob's Red Mill is one of them, which is a fantastic one. You just want to make sure that it's ground really well if you're making it yourself so that there's not little bits of seed. And then there's also a 1/3 of a cup of arrowroot, which is also a root vegetable starch, and then a 1/3 of a cup of tapioca starch, which we just talked about. So we're going to put those flours in here and get all of them in here. And then we're going to also put in 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and a 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt. Now, the baking powder that I like to use, there's a couple of different companies that make it, but it's free of cornstarch because baking powder typically has cornstarch in it. So what I like to use is one that has potato starch because there's a lot of people that are sensitive to corn these days. So one of the companies that I use that has a corn-free baking powder is Pamela's. Pamela's is a fantastic company that has a lot of gluten-free baked products. If you're not paleo, but you're really just trying to eliminate gluten, then Pamela's is a great option. But they do have a lot of grain in them, even though they're gluten-free grains. So if you're trying to do a paleo diet, their products are not going to be right for you. But their baking powder is fantastic, and it's corn-free. And the other company that has a corn-free baking powder that I'm familiar with is a company called Hain, H-A-I-N. And you can find these online and at some of your local natural food stores. Okay, so we have all of those dry ingredients in here. Now, if you wanted to take these vanilla cupcakes and make them into chocolate, you could add a 1/4 cup or a 1/3 of a cup of cocoa powder into this, and that's all you need to make it into a chocolate batter. So we're just going to mix it up with my wooden spoon here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to make the liquid mixture that I'm going to then pour into this. So we're going to get a bowl. And in this bowl, typically I would put in 2 eggs. And the cupcakes that I already made that I'm going to show you so that we don't have to wait for everything to come out of the oven have eggs in them. So you'll get to see what they look like in the typical recipe. But I wanted to show you an alternative way of making these cupcakes that are egg-free. So what I did, instead of using 2 eggs, I'm going to use a Chia Egg Substitute, which is homemade and very simple. So what I did was I took 2 tablespoons of whole chia seeds, and I mix them in a small bowl with 6 tablespoons of water. So essentially that's equivalent to 2 eggs. If you want to do a 1 egg substitute, it's 1 tablespoon of chia seeds, whole or ground, or you can use a tablespoon of ground flax, which you would already have because of the recipe, and then 3 tablespoons of water, and that's equivalent to 1 egg, so you can double it for 2. If it's much more than 2 or 3 eggs, you end up getting kind of a funky consistency and density, and it's not really worth it. But for 2 eggs, it's really not an issue. And what you do is you mix it up with a little spoon, and you set it aside on your counter for about 15 minutes. And after that, you get this very gelatinous, egg-like consistency. And that's going to be our substitute for the egg. So we're just going to put it in here. The order doesn't really matter because we're going to whisk all these liquid ingredients in together once they're all in the bowl. So here's my 2-egg counterpart. Now what I find when I make the cupcakes without eggs is they're a little bit more dense. And so what I like to do is add a little bit of extra baking soda to the mix to help create excuse me, I'm going to get the baking soda. I'm just remembering now. So what I like to do is add an extra 1/2 or 3/4 teaspoon of baking soda to help it rise a little bit more. So we're going to put that in, and that's just going to help be a good substitute for not having the eggs in it. But when you're doing eggs, you really don't need any additional baking soda to just the 1 teaspoon. So we've got our 2 eggs or 2 chia seed egg substitutes in here. And then we're also going to put in 1/2 cup of olive oil. Now I like to use olive oil because it's so healthy. It's fantastic essential fatty acids for us. And I always have it in my pantry because I use it a lot to make things with. Olive oil is really good. If you're roasting, though, you want to be careful, or frying or doing high heat. It's not an issue in baked goods, but if it's really having a direct contact with a very high heat, it's not very stable, and so it can get a little bit inflammatory. And so then you might want to use something like avocado oil or even grapeseed oil, which is not quite as beneficial as avocado oil. You can use coconut oil, extra virgin coconut oil. They're much more stable at higher heats. So we're going to put 1/2 cup of olive oil in, and then we're going to do 1/2 cup of maple syrup. That's the sweetener that I typically sweeten things with when I'm baking. It is high glycemic. It has a lot of natural sugar, so if you have sugar metabolism issues, you might want to cut down on the amount, although this is not an overpoweringly sweet recipe. But also it has some fantastic minerals to it, manganese and a lot of other just fantastic minerals. So it's a good sweetener to use if you're looking to get some healthy nutritional properties. We're also going to do some milk. Now, being paleo, we typically avoid dairy. And in my household, we have a lot of dairy sensitivities anyway. So we're always using a milk substitute. Unfortunately, my daughter also has a coconut allergy, so I'm typically avoiding coconut products, even though there's a lot of fantastic health properties to coconut and coconut milk. But instead of using coconut milk, which would be a good option, I'm using hemp milk. And hemp milk is a milk that's made out of hemp seeds. And it's fantastic because it's a little bit of a more thicker consistency, like a nut milk, as compared to more of a watery one, like rice milks and things of that nature. So we're going to do 1/2 cup of hemp milk, and this is an original flavored, unsweetened hemp milk. So there's no added sugars, and it's not flavored vanilla or chocolate or anything of that nature. It's just a standard milk consistency. And then we're going to do 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, because these are vanilla cupcakes, so we need that vanilla flavor. So we're going to do 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Now this vanilla has no added sugar to it. That's important to look at the ingredients. You can definitely find vanilla extract without added sugar, but there's also equally a lot that have added sugar, so you just have to get into the habit of reading the ingredients and making sure that you're making the effort to avoid them, because it's much healthier, obviously. We're taking the effort to sweeten these with maple syrup, and so obviously you don't want to add any additional refined sugars. Then we're going to add 1/3 cup of applesauce, and I love these little squeezables that we have in our house. The kids obviously take them for snacks. This is just organic applesauce, but it's about 1/3 cup in these little containers. So this is what I end up using. It's really easy for baking. But in substitute to 1/3 cup of applesauce, you can also use a mashed banana, like a medium to small banana mashed you can do instead of the applesauce. And you'll get the same effect. Okay, so we have our liquid ingredients here. We want to make sure that we have everything we need. And now we're going to whisk. And what we want to do is just get particularly the chia seeds. I just want you to be able to see this. The chia seeds off the bottom and incorporate it in. Let's see. Okay, I'm just making sure that everything is mixed in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some space. I'm going to get my big dry bowl in here, and then I'm going to take the wet mixture and I'm just going to pour it right in. Nice and easy. Get a little bit of that chia in there. And then I'm just going to mix. I'm going to use my spatula so I can scrape things off the side. And that's it. I'm just going to mix it up until it's a smooth consistency. You can see I've got the flour in there, so I just want to mix it up well, and it's going to make a wet mixture. And then we're going to scoop it into our muffin tin. Some other things to tell you, I preheated the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the baking temperature that we're going to be baking these cupcakes in. I also took my muffin tin and I added baking cups because I find that that's so much easier to get a consistent feel around it and also to get them out of the muffin tin. And then, of course, not to have to spend too much time cleaning the muffin tin. So I'm just mixing this up. At home, I'll typically use the mixer. And then when the cupcakes are done, they have to cool anyway. So it gives me enough time to clean the electric mixing bowl and then make the frosting in it, which is always delicious. Make sure you clean it because there are eggs theoretically in this batter. Today it's chia seeds, but you want to clean it well and then you can make your frosting. So you can see that this one is a little bit more of a meaty kind of batter because of the chia seeds. If you're making it with eggs, it should be a much smoother consistency. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get our porcelain muffin tin out, but any sort of muffin tin will work. And you can see I've got baking cups here. I use, over there, I love to use this company baking cups. They're, I think, made largely out of parchment paper type of material. But what I found is they don't stick to the muffins as much or the cupcakes as much as some other baking cups do. And I love that they're unbleached. It's a much healthier way to eat cupcakes and muffins. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to use an ice cream scooper, and it just helps me to be proportionate in how much batter I'm putting in each section. So let's see here. We're going to scrape this off of the spatula sink, and then we are going to get an equal amount of batter. Don't worry if some of the batter gets on your baking dish because you can just scrape it off after. It's not going to affect the cupcakes or muffins. The other thing I would say is you can add other ingredients into this to create a different flavor profile. We talked about doing it with cocoa, but you can also add chopped nuts, you can add chocolate chips, you can add some lemon extract and juice and a little bit of lemon zest and some poppy seeds. You can make this into muffins. This is essentially the muffin recipe, but it has such a soft, moist consistency that I use it for cupcakes interchangeably. But if you're doing it for muffins, you can add blueberries, and instead of maybe the applesauce, you can use a mashed banana. And that will give you blueberry banana muffins. There's a zillion and one options. But just so you know, there's lots of ways to do this. And now we're just getting the last of the batter in here, and we're going to get every last bit of this to fill up the last container. And let's see if we can get a bit more. And there's my dozen. There we go. So we'll put this in the sink. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to put it in the oven, in the middle of the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm going to put my timer on for 24 minutes. I know my oven, but you might want to start at 23 minutes, depending on if it's convection or not. It'll cook a little faster or slower. Everybody's oven is a little bit different. So I'm going to put it on for 24 minutes, and that's my timer. And then you just want to do the traditional cake test, where you take a toothpick or a cake tester into the center point of one of the tallest cupcakes, if there is a variation on a theme and size. And if it comes out clean, then you know that it's ready. Specifically also, it'll be a little golden brown on top. And then you want to let it cool completely in the muffin tin, and then take it and put it on a cooling rack. Because if you're going to frost these cupcakes, you don't want them to be hot or warm at all, because the frosting will just melt and make a big soupy mess. So now let's get into the frosting, because we do actually have some cupcakes that have already been cooled. Of course, I had to make some extra so that you wouldn't have to wait for everything to be done in the oven. So this, I'm going to use an electric mixer, or if you have a hand beater that's electric, because you have to get some air in there and some speed. So what we're going to do is make a frosting that's naturally sweetened. And for this, I'm going to use organic palm oil shortening as part of my mix. Now, palm oil is definitely controversial today because of some of the lack of sustainability out there with the rainforests, and there's issues with orangutans, and definitely a sad state of affairs. So when you buy shortening that's made out of palm oil, ideally it's organic, but also you want to be looking for some of the badges, so to speak, or the seals that talk about sustainability, so that you know that you're making efforts to not contribute to some of the trauma out there in the environment. So this is Spectrum, and it's organic palm oil shortening, and it definitely has some wonderful healthy fats. So we're going to put about 1.5 cups in, and then we're going to use something called maple cream. Now, we've talked about how much I love using maple syrup. Frosting is definitely supposed to be sweet, but we don't have to make it be icky sweet. The cocoa powder we're going to add in is very bitter because it's unsweetened, so we have to sweeten it with something. So this is maple cream. Maple cream is made entirely out of maple syrup, but then it's whipped into a butter-like consistency, and it is divine and super high sugar naturally. So if you are dealing with insulin issues, you might want to cut this down. You can order maple cream online, or some farmers markets might carry it, but it is a fantastic, fantastic butter-like substance, and you're going to see how thick it is. I typically will order, 4 or 5 of these half-pound containers and put them in my freezer. This is an 8 ounce or half pound. You can see how thick it is. And it's really, really delicious, and it has some fantastic minerals to it, as we spoke about. So you've got about 8 ounces or 1/2 pound of the maple cream. And we're going to get it all in there. Okay. And then we're going to put in about 1/2 cup of cocoa. Now, you have a bunch of different options when you're dealing with cocoa. Certainly we want to get the variety that has no added sugar, because of course we're sweetening this naturally. You don't need any added sugar. But this one, there's a difference between cocoa and cacao. Cacao is raw. It hasn't been, the beans were not roasted. They're still sort of fermented. And so it's a fantastic option. Cocoa powder is fine also, particularly if that's what you can find. But this is a raw cacao powder. There's a company called Navitas that makes cacao powder that is really healthy for you, and also sustainably harvested and fair trade and all those really wonderful and important things. Now, with chocolate, salt is always delicious. A pinch of salt makes everything sweeter, particularly when you're baking, because it makes the flavors more robust. So what we're going to do is put a pinch of salt in, and then we're going to do a little bit of vanilla. I'm just going to add stuff to the sink here so that keeping our space neat. Okay, so we're going to put in a teaspoon of vanilla extract so that we can have a little bit more of that robust flavor. And it also, the cocoa powder and the vanilla really help to hide the maple flavor. So for those people that maple is not their favorite flavor, you really can't taste it strongly in the cupcakes, and you really can't taste it in the frosting because the vanilla and the cocoa powder really come out on top. Okay, so we're going to throw this away, and then we're going to put in about a tablespoon of milk, and we talked about how I like to use hemp milk. So we're just going to do about a tablespoon of milk. And then what we're going to do is put the bowl into the mixer, the motor, and we're going to start slow. And that's important because if you start high, then what's going to happen is the cocoa powder is going to go everywhere, which is never very fun. So we're just getting things in our sink here. And then we're going to pull our mixer around, and we're going to add this in here, and we're going to get our blade. Now, I love this type of blade. You can definitely use a beater attachment, and that works well too, but I love this blade because it has a silicone, and so it scoops up everything inside the bowl, so I don't have to do a lot of scraping down, and it does a good job of beating as well, even though it's more of a paddle type of attachment. So we're going to raise this, and then we're going to turn it on low first so that we can get the cocoa powder incorporated. And once the cocoa powder is incorporated, we're going to put it on high. And so now we're there, all the way up to maybe 8. Smell it, it's delicious. And we're trying to get all the shortening specks of white to disappear. So we're going to do one scrape down. Let's see here. And just scrape all of the good stuff off of the paddle. And then we're going to put it on high one more time. And as I was screaming to you before while this was on, we want to get all the white specks to come out of it and be just nicely smooth, consistent. And so here we go again. And we'll just let it run. It's almost done, and it's just divine. Oh. Almost done. Wow, that looks awesome. So let me show you the consistency of this. So this frosting, you can see, is nice and light and chocolate. Oh my God, it's great. It's so chocolatey. It's not excessively sweet, but it is a little bit sweet because it is a cupcake frosting. I can taste the chocolate and the vanilla. I really can't taste the maple, but it's just divine. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the paddle out of the KitchenAid. We're going to shift that around, and we're going to scrape this off so we don't miss any of the frosting. This should be enough to frost at least 12 cupcakes and give you a little bit of extra for whatever, dollop in your coffee, if you drink coffee. All right, so put this over here. And so what we're going to do is we are going to frost a cupcake to show you how to do it. Now, you can definitely pipe this frosting with a piping bag. Or you can just use a frosting blade and just smush it up, which is what we're going to do today. Show you how easy it is. Now, these are the cupcakes. that are done that I did previously, and they're nice and risen. And remember that we use eggs in this batter, and I'll show you once we bite into it how moist it is inside. But we're going to start with just frosting. So what I do is just take a dollop on and kind of use a circular pattern. And if I wanted to, I could definitely use a piping bag, but today we're just going to do a standard. See that? All right, let's do a couple of these. Because of course my kids are going to run into the room in a little bit and say, "What about me? I've been so quiet and patient and done all my schoolwork this week." It's, by the way, a Friday for me. So my kiddos have worked very hard, and so we're going to have cupcakes for everybody. And let's see here. In this case, I'll have enough batter to do all of them. Okay, let's get started and eat some, and then I can frost the rest of these later. But you can see how beautiful they are. Now, if you wanted to make a vanilla, maybe maple flavored frosting, you would leave out the cocoa powder, but the rest of the recipe would be the same. You would do the palm oil shortening, you would do the maple cream, and then instead of the cocoa powder, you could add some arrowroot powder. You probably don't need a half a cup, maybe a quarter cup, but it's going to have more of a maple flavor to it. But keep in mind that without the bitterness of the cocoa powder, it's going to be much sweeter. So then you might cut down the maple cream by half of that container, and you'll get a really great consistency. So let me show you this beautiful cupcake. And you can see how moist it is, and that it's got the delicious frosting on top. Let's take a bite. Wow. Anytime I have one of my cupcakes, I'm just in heaven. Should have seen me when I was pregnant. I had one of these every single day. Well, not quite, but it felt that way. Anyway, you can see on the inside the beautiful moist texture, and the frosting is so rich and airy because of the shortening. It's just delicious, and this is packed full of nutrients from the flax, the essential fats from that, the hemp milk, the maple syrup with all of the minerals. There's just so many wonderful nutrients to this. This is not low glycemic. This definitely has calories, but they're nutrient-dense calories, but it does have some natural sugars in it, so probably not one every day. But it is fantastically flavorful. So I hope you try this at home. I hope you use it for all kinds of celebrations, and also just some just because cupcakes with your kiddos or your family, or just for you and your loved ones. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. You can visit me on my blog and website at www.simplypaleo.com, and please message me there with any kinds of ideas or comments or wish lists, cravings, things you'd love to watch me make. And I hope you stay tuned for the next episodes of Simply Paleo with me, making all kinds of fun paleo creations. Thanks so much for tuning in.